We are continuing our trek through the Old Testament using the narrative lectionary. Last Sunday, we explored prayer and the God to whom we pray, as we talked about King Solomon and the magnificent temple that he built that was to be a house of prayer for all of the Israelite people. So, following Solomon's death, Israel divides into two kingdoms when the northern tribes secede. They become known as Israel, and they establish their capital in Samaria. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin make up the southern tribes, and their capital is located in Jerusalem. So that's where we are today. Each kingdom is ruled by their own king. The Davidic dynasty runs through the southern kingdom. Now, King Ahab is the king of the northern kingdom. And prior to our text, it's recorded about him, Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. So that kind of gives us a hint about how things are going to go for Israel. King Ahab is married to a Phoenician princess, Jezebel. Ahab joins Jezebel in her worship of the Canaanite goddess Asherah, as well as the Canaanite storm god Baal, and he creates an altar for these gods and this goddess. According to ancient myth, it is thought that this god is the one who provided rain so that the crops would be fertile and that they would have a lot of land. So here are the people of Israel. They're now worshiping the storm god and Yahweh, and likely other gods that are around. This isn't what God intended for them. It's not at all what God intended for their well-being. Under King Ahab's leadership, things certainly go downhill in a hurry. Elijah, whose name means "my God is Yahweh," sort of appears out of nowhere. This story is actually the first time that he is mentioned in the scripture. He shows up at a town in Israel east of the Jordan River in a land called Gilead. And he primarily is prophesying in the northern kingdom. So Elijah, as you probably remember, is right up there with Moses, leading God's people into faithfulness to God. You might also remember Elijah is present in the account of the transfiguration of Jesus. So here we are. Elisha, newly arrived on the scene, confronts King Ahab about his idolatrous behavior, his leadership. He says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word." Elijah stands in direct opposition to King Ahab and his storm god. So this, of course, endangers Elijah's life. And God tells Elijah to go hide from the wrath of the king near his hometown east of the Jordan. So, sure enough, the drought in the land begins. Yet, God provides for Elijah when he is hiding out through water that has collected in a gully. God also provides food for Elijah in a very unexpected way, through ravens who bring food to Elijah twice a day. Now, ravens are unclean animals. The Israelites were forbidden from eating them. A raven's natural tendency is to take or to steal, not to give food. As Sarah M. Koenig explains in her commentary, and I'm quoting here, God's choice of this animal to provide bread and meat for Elijah demonstrates two things. First, that God's manner of provision can be surprising or unusual. And second, that God's command overrides the natural instinct of this creature. making it even more miraculous. So, in the drought, eventually, the gully dries up. So God once again speaks to Elijah. God tells Elijah to leave his hiding place. So he's been here, hiding out. Incidentally, we think he was born somewhere in here. So God calls Elijah to go all the way up to Zarephath on the coast. Doesn't look too bad, right? But let's remember, he doesn't just jump in his car and go to the coast. And what's more than that, his trip takes him right through this land where Jezebel's father is king. Dangerous. Talk about going from what is the saying, from the frying pan to the fire? I think that is. So here in Zarephath, in the unlikeliest of all places, Elijah is provided for by the unlikeliest of all people, by a woman, a widow, no less, with a son. Now, in that culture, a widow woman is vulnerable. She's by herself, ignored by society. She lives alone in poverty, raising her son, barely surviving. In fact, when Elijah arrives, she's preparing to build that fire that she thinks will be her last meal for herself and her son. She's only got a little bit of meal and even a few drops of oil left to make this bread. She's resigned herself to death. How can she possibly provide for Elijah? Yet, in the middle of this Phoenician land of Jezebel's father, who worships the storm god and any other god, this unnamed woman declares her faith in the God of Israel. She does as Elijah says. She makes him some bread first, or cake, and miraculously her containers of meal and oil last for several days, many days, it says. So the authors and the editors of Kings make it clear that it is God, capital G, who sustains life, the God of Israel, the God like no other. We see immediately following our text, Elijah brings the woman's son back to life who has died through God's power. And later on in the story, there's the dramatic account, the showdown between God and Elijah and Baal and the 850 prophets of the Canaanite god and goddess. We know who wins, right? God. So, friends, here we are, centuries later, in a completely different context this morning. But yet, this text contains promises and insights of the God who sustains that are relevant in shaping our faith today. I believe particularly so as we enter this week with the election, with its anxiety, the unknown, and fears. It's interesting that today's lectionary text is on the God who sustains when we are in the place where we are going into this election. We can cling to the promise that God will sustain us, even when all around is looking desperate, as Elijah must have felt when he was in hiding. The water in the gully's dry, his throat is parched. What's he going to do? There's no water anywhere. Yet the sustaining God provides for him. There is no reason, friends, to believe that the sustaining God will not provide for us today. Yes, God will sustain us, but perhaps not the way we expect it or even desire it. God sustains Elijah by using the unclean ravens to feed him. And think about how he must feel that God has called him to travel through this dangerous territory to get to Zarephath and an unknown. He doesn't know what's going to happen there. I'm pretty sure Elijah would have preferred that God sustained him by just letting him stay there by the gully, supplying heaping platefuls of delicious food and gallons of water miraculously, rather than Elijah having to risk his life once again. So, friends, as difficult as it might be, we need to accept that God does work in ways that we do not understand, do not expect, and frankly, at times maybe don't even want. God is all-seeing. Our vision is limited. We see only a small bit. Any of us that wear glasses think how in the morning when we don't have our glasses on or contacts, can we see? Not much. We are called to have faith in the present actions of God, even when the future is unknown. We are called to step out in that faith when we cannot see the end in sight. Notice in the text, God didn't say that the woman's meal and oil was going to last indefinitely. God said through Elijah, the jar of meal will not be emptied and the jug of oil will not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth. The woman had to trust in God for that moment and the next moment and the next one. Well, that's a tough one. If I would have been Elijah, if I would have been the woman, I would have been asking Elijah, so, okay, wait. I want to know, when is that going to happen? When is God going to fill up this jar of meal? When? And how's it going to happen? Tell me all the details. That's what I would have said. How about you all? We want to know about today, tomorrow, and the future. We want to be able to plan our futures. Now, to a degree, of course, we are responsibly planning for the future. But what I'm talking about is not panicking about the future. I'm talking about trusting in God for what we cannot see. God calls us to begin every single day being present in that moment and having faith and trust that if God is present with us in that moment, God will be present in the next and the next. We don't need to panic about the future. I think I might write that on a little index card, put it on my desk, along with all the other notes that are there. We don't need to panic about the future. To keep ourselves from being overwhelmed by panic, I think it's important to understand where we're looking, to keep our focus on God, looking to God. Elijah tells the woman, do not be afraid. So she, rather than keeping her eyes on her precarious position and those little bits of meal and few drops of oil that she has, she focuses on those words, the words of God. Do not be afraid. If she would have focused only on those meager portions of meal and oil that she had, there is no way she would have made that cake for Elijah, much less let him eat first before she and her son did. And then her fear would have prevented her from experiencing that miracle through Elijah that God provided for her. When we focus only on the things that scare us, Our fears become larger and larger as the object of those fears becomes bigger and bigger and more real. One of my preaching blogs that I look at frequently, it's called Backstory Preaching. And these words really jumped out at me when I was reading a blog. I'm quoting here: "The longer we gaze at our fear, the more power we give our fear, and the more faith we place in the forces intent on destruction." Like the woman on the brink of starvation and the unknown, we are also on the brink of the unknown and frightening as we anticipate the election, with its potential for violence. And like Elijah and the widow woman, we are called to look at God, not to look at kings or idols, or in our case, political candidates. We look to God to sustain us. As we approach uncertainty this week, I encourage us to ask ourselves where our gaze is focused. Is it on the things that frighten us? Or is it on God? And not just for this week. This week happens to be the election, but for anything, for all of our lives, where is our gaze focused? I adapted some questions from the preaching blog that I mentioned earlier that I think are worth asking ourselves. And I encourage you to ponder these as you go through the week and through the year, to think about and to think where your faith and your focus lie. Has our gaze become focused on a system that opposes love, mercy, and grace, as if that system can defeat the shalom of God? Are we fearfully fixated on a context that refuses to heal, forgive, and include, as if that context can overcome the unconditional love of Jesus? Are we afraid of those who oppose community, justice, and dignity, as if their opposition can tamp down the work of the Spirit? I encourage us to recall how God has sustained us in the past, and to begin each day knowing that God is present in that moment and the next, no matter what is ahead of us. Friends, we serve the God, the triune God, the immanent and transcendent God, the God of Israel, the God like no other, the God like no other. The God who will and does sustain us now and always. To this God be the glory, and to this God may we direct our allegiance, our focus, and our faith. May it be so.